Welcome to the big interview. My name's Gary Robinson, I'm the publisher of International Investment, and with me today for the big interview is Rob Shipman, CEO of UAP Group. Rob, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Yeah, good, thanks, very good.
Rob, tell me a little bit about the UAP Group. What does it do and how's it made up?
Yeah, UAP Group really was formed on the back of 20 years in the industry working for different companies, involved different projects, from building an office out in Guernsey with a previous company, then involved a merger acquisition. Just basically the expertise I've had over the years, decided actually it's time and the opportunity to do it ourselves. Met key people in the industry that we decided we could all work very well together, and then decided now was the right time to bring something a bit different, a bit new to the market. And the aim of UAP Group and why we set it up really is to try and be a bit more technology focused, a bit more modern than traditional trust and pension companies see in the offshore space, and really bring a fresh look and feel, and also more slick environment clients can interact with. So bringing it really into 21st century, because at the moment a lot of trust companies and pension companies, particularly in the offshore space, are seen as quite traditional, quite cumbersome, quite awkward to deal with. Part of the reason that is conception is because obviously regulation does cause some awkwardness, but it's really looking at what we can do with systems, how we can build them out to make the client onboarding a lot more smoother, the whole client journey a lot more smoother. And really just a fresh look and feel to what we're doing. And also the expertise I have offshore, the expertise James has, one of fellow directors on the onshore space, brings quite a nice, unique skill set together as well. And our aim really is to build this out throughout Guernsey and more into the international space throughout the UK and further afield as well. Good answer.
Now you're based in Guernsey. Why Guernsey? Why did you pick Guernsey?
Guernsey really was it's where I ended up ultimately career-wise in the early days, basically on the back of QROPS. I opened the office for a company there. We took it from, in the very heavy days of QROPS, from 3 staff up to about 55, 60 staff. And that's how I ended up in Guernsey and stayed there ever since. I mean, it's a pretty island, it's a very nice island. But also, if you're in the pension space, it's a very strong jurisdiction to be in. Strong reputation, large number of providers, ranging from the personal space to a large corporate schemes are based there. So it has a lot of expertise. So it's actually quite a good place to locate yourself, and also to be with your peers as well, which I think is important if you're running a company, to be able to interact with your peers and help each other and learn from each other.
Now the name Rob Shipman is synonymous with QROPS. I'd heard a story that you really invented QROPS. Just explain that to me, and how did you become known for QROPS?
Yeah, it's a funny story, because QROPS was way back in 2006. So in fact, it goes back before 2006, before the legislation changed, the A-Day, and modernisation of pensions, a simplification project, which made pensions more complicated, ironically. It was before that I was working with a client. I was based in Gibraltar at the time, working with a client, and for about 2 years previous to that, kept nagging about he'd personally got his own pension. He wanted to move it, and I said, well, at the moment you can, because that's when the old days of the old reciprocal agreements were there. We had an office at the time in the Isle of Man, and we did reciprocal work there. But the problem is you had to move there. You had to live there for a period of time, and that way you could move your UK pension. And the same with Jersey, Guernsey. We all had all the Crown dependents had these agreements where you lived, and they had to move there, live there, and the pension could follow without too much tax consequence, but then you had to remain there for a period of time as well. And obviously the client was actually based over in a warmer jurisdiction and didn't really see the benefit of going somewhere a bit cooler. So kept nagging and saying, well, that's the only solution we had at the time. But that obviously, I was doing work with pensions anyway. I was doing work with Guernsey pensions, particularly on the more savings plan type ilk down in southern Spain. So we're always looking at legislation, seeing what we could and couldn't do. And then we picked up the change in 2006, and lo and behold, I said, well, actually, the legislation has changed. We do have an opportunity where we can actually start to move pensions, and you don't have to live there anymore. I think that was the biggest change in 2006 the UK made. It removed the residency requirement to be able to move a pension. That's ultimately what became the Qualified Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme legislation, as was then. And so we ultimately ended up into market because of that client in late 2006. So we're probably a second in market behind Scottish Provident at the time. And then because we were one of the first in the market, we started to pick up success. And then obviously I took quite a technical understanding of what we were doing. I also had quite a cautious approach to it as well. We just built on from there, built a network, got with some very key introducers at the time who had large global presence, and because of that we had quite relatively early success on something that was quite new, and that obviously gave us quite a foothold in the market, and that's how I became known more on the QROPS side.
Interesting. It's a good bit of backdrop there. Things kind of changed for QROPS, didn't they? A few years ago, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember International Investment running the story. I think we got it as an exclusive that it was almost like overnight the government went, bang, there's a new taxation onto QROPS. I mean, how did that kind of, did it damage the industry? Did it set the industry back in any way? Why did they do that in the first place?
And the problem the UK has had, and particularly UK Treasury has had, since 2006, obviously QROPS has been tremendously successful. And I don't think HMRC realised and Treasury as well, how successful it would have been, because I don't think they really quantified the number of people that actually had left the UK, had reasonably large pensions left behind. And no surprise, if you're not living in the UK, why would you want to keep your pension behind in the UK? They were looking to move it to a jurisdiction where it was better for them to manage. It was just a lot easier to manage. The UK is making regulation a lot more difficult for them to manage their own pensions. And so I think there's a number of factors that it became very, very successful. And I think the legislation itself was really pushed on the UK government by the European Union on the freedom of service movement and freedom of access to service capital and everything else that wants all the EU indicators. So obviously, as a member of the European Union, the UK had no choice but to bring in reciprocal. You need to be able to move your pension around as you can with your EU pensions. They're free to move around. I think the biggest difference, though, for UK pensions is there's a lot more tax relief on contributions than you particularly get on some of the European models, where there seems to be less tax relief on contributions, more tax relief on bringing money out, which is the reverse model of the UK. So you get 100% tax relief on certain amounts and annual allowances and things. So there's a lot of tax leakage for the UK government. I think bringing in a 25% overseas transfer charge under certain circumstances is a way of protecting some revenue leakage. I think that's why they did it. And I think ultimately that makes it more difficult for clients, and its clients ultimately lose out, because it restricts them more, there's a lot more restrictions, because one of the big restrictions if you deviate from the EU is that you have to live in the jurisdiction where your pension is. So it's sort of going that backward step to pre-2006.
How does it stand now then with the UK not being in the EU? Is this something, although let's be honest, can you really see the tax man saying, look, we don't care about this 25% that we're currently receiving and reversing it? Is there an opportunity there? Do you think they might make a change?
It's very difficult to say. It's a political question. I think there's issues on the cards, but I think the volume has dropped because of what's the restrictions that are in place now. So if you're outside of the EU, you have to live where you are. There's very few countries you want to move your pension to where you're living. I mean, if you lived in, say, an African country, why would you want to move your pension to Africa? It's actually the opposite. And so I think they've restricted it probably enough. They probably may not interfere, but it's crystal ball time. I mean, we could all make a lot of money if we knew what was around the corner, I think. But I think from the UK perspective, it would be difficult, because no doubt it would be challenged, even though they're no longer EU. They can't ignore the European courts if they want to interact with Europe, but you just don't know, ultimately.
Now, really quickly, I'll ask this sort of extra bit on that. I mean, look, it wasn't just because of the government wanted to get some extra taxation in. The QROPS system was kind of, with this cross-border movement and with different regulations in different countries, it was something that was easy for the less scrupulous advisors of the world, and sure enough, were and probably still are a number of those still kicking about. They were able to sort of manipulate the QROPS. is it sort of a few bad apples have ruined, have ruined it for everybody else, or is it, does QROPS still have a future?
I say it should have a future. I think the problem you had at the time, if you look back as well, we were in the early 2000s, well, mid 2000s. Look at what was going on. We are possibly going into a similar situation now. So there's some dangers on the warning signs again. We're in a very low return environment. We're in recession in the late 2000s, and clients were looking for returns. So I think, yes, there were a number of advisors that weren't perhaps having the client's best interests at heart, but also you had clients actively searching for returns in a low or nil return environment. So you had the perfect storm in reality. You had clients looking for return because they're getting no return, and you had advisors looking for business, and those that perhaps went for the short term rather than long term, and obviously been and gone as we've seen, took advantage of that. I think that was the issue, and I think that's not necessarily an issue for QROPS. I think that's just an issue in general. When you go into low return environments, it opens the door for investments that are more risky, because clients like to believe if you're a client depending on trying to build something to retire on, or you're in retirement looking for return and you're seeing your capital erode away because you aren't getting very much return, and if someone comes along and says, look, you know what, we can get you 8%, look at this, isn't it wonderful? 10% as was, we saw the old 10% from the old investments that obviously aren't here. Clients like that. They like to believe it. They want to believe it because they're desperate to preserve their capital, try and get some income. And sometimes a bit of greed on the client part. So you do have that perfect storm scenario.
Fair enough.
I think the difference is now, though, which is protection for clients if they go to the right jurisdictions, is where ombudsmen exist, because that's the check and balance on providers and advisors, because they will correct positions and will act fairly for the client.
We're in a very transparent world. It's interesting, we mentioned something that you are known for, and I've met you a few times now, Rob, and one of the things that struck me from the conversations we've had right the way through, and on every occasion we've spoken about this, is trust versus contracts. Now, to me, trust versus contracts, it sort of doesn't... It's two bits of paper, isn't it? What does it mean, and why is it important?
I mean, if you look on the very general level, they do the same thing. You've got a pension product that provides, at a certain age, will provide a pension on retirement for a client. So trust or contract do exactly that. I think the problem is when you go to certain jurisdictions, and we're seeing it increasingly, particularly around Europe and other ones, I always describe the issue as a bit of a light switch when you've got a pension written under trust now. Where a tax authority in a jurisdiction such as, for example, Spain, Portugal, Italy will say, well, okay, you've got a pension, that's fine, the pension legislation is this, so you're taxed in a certain way. But then they go, oh, hang about, there's a trustee involved. It's a trust. Trust, we don't understand trust because we're a civil law jurisdiction. We don't really understand it. Trust is a dirty word in Europe because just think it's there to avoid tax. And all of a sudden they go, you've got we understand you've got a pension, but actually, no, it's trust, and I always say it's a bit of a light switch depending what the tax authorities want to achieve. So 1 minute it's switched over to pension, but that doesn't quite work because you get more tax if you switch it over and tax it as a trust. And you see that particularly in France and Spain, Portugal, and increasingly there's debates going on down in South Africa even about that. So what contract does for clients is, because like I said, they do the same thing in terms of a client retirement, but by going under contract, what that does, it takes that trust element away, which has pros and cons. But by taking the trust element away, then when you look at the pension, it can't be a trust because there is no trustee involved. It is a contractual corporate obligation to the client to provide a pension under these certain circumstances from a fund that is there. So that debate and that uncertainty about will it be taxed as a pension or will it be taxed as a contract disappears, because then it squarely clearly is a pension contract to provide a pension. There is no trustee or trust involved, so therefore it can't fall into the trust camp. And I think it just gives, in certain jurisdictions, clients a lot more certainty. So I do see over the next few years more and more contract plans being used. In fact, I'd say 90% of what we do now is under contract rather than trust in our own offices in Guernsey for these particular reasons.
Interesting stuff. It's and well put as well. To me, it sort of feels like it feels like pretty obvious. You know, it's like what's the point in doing something that you don't necessarily need? But surely there still are you know, you said there's pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
So in some cases, it's not going to be the end of the trust industry, is
No,
it?
not at all.
I was going to say there's quite a lot of...
Well, we're trustee anyway. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, quite a lot of companies might want to
yeah.
disagree. How's this working in the EU? You know, the application of contracts in the EU, how does that work?
I think, like I say, it gives you a certain sense. At the moment, we're talking to tax firms in France, Italy, Spain, all coming back saying, yeah, these will be taxed as pensions, giving us certainty for clients, where with our old international pension product written under trust, we don't get that same opinion. Particularly on Guernsey being a non-EU jurisdiction, it's basically, it relies on its structure. And I think I think what's interesting, what's going to change over in the future is, and we've seen it a number of times now, not just with QROPS, but with other pension products, is, and this is important for advisors as well, is the fact that you've got to understand for a client how something's constructed now. It's not just good enough to say, and we looked at Malta, what happened with their double tax agreement with the US. It's not good enough to say you've got a double tax agreement or an EU jurisdiction as to why you should use something, because that not there's no guarantees that will still work. You've got to look at the actual structure of the product that your client's going to, where they live, and what implication of that, because just because something says pension on the tin, you've got to go beneath the bonnet now, see how it's constructed. Is it under trust, is it contract, what's the pros and cons for benefits for clients? I mean, so in Malta with the US has had its double tax agreement disapplied for pensions. And so now you've got to really look under the bonnet what the US clients in Malta are left with. And you can't particularly write to a pension for a US person under trust because it has adverse tax issues for them if you've got no double tax agreement in place, which obviously Malta now has, which is why increasingly it gives certainty for clients by going under contract. Even it does sort of future-proof a bit. I mean, we'll flick clients freely between trust and contract in our own office to make sure it works for them, because we feel it's really important the structure works for the client, not just the jurisdiction, but the actual structure for the product that they're in, and it's fit for purpose. And if they need to change, you've got to be able to adapt and switch them as a need, because some jurisdictions may be better for trust, some may be better for contract, and you've got to be nimble and flip between the two.
Now, we've got our International Investment Latin America Forum coming up, which you guys are taking part in. We're going to have a conversation.
Exciting times.
Look, what's not to like? Miami, yeah? That's good. You know, why can't we do more events in Miami?
Especially in autumn and winter.
Yeah. Well, this is September the 8th. We're very much looking forward to it. Just tell me a little bit about you mentioned the US then.
Yeah.
And it's a decent sized market, the US and LATAM. What is, what's your product out there? What are you offering to that marketplace?
Yeah, we've basically, well, I've personally spent about the last 8-9 years on doing a lot of R&D, partly personal. I have US connections, so it's things start for a reason. This is personal reasons. I've been interested as going over to the US at some point. So I've been looking at the issues surrounding US and US connected. And part of FATCA started the problems for US persons overseas. With the reporting obligations, financial institutions ran away from dealing with US. And it's more than FATCA, it's also the what they call the Passive Foreign Investment Company Tax Regime, which is abbreviated to PFIC. So if you've got clients investing overseas in non-US products, the chances are they'll fall foul of that legislation. And even if the product is compliant, you still may have reporting obligations on that, and that causes burdens for the financial institutions, causes costs for the financial institutions. And what we've seen is, particularly in Europe and elsewhere for US connected, is because this cost, because they're not the main client base for these institutions and these banks and financial houses, they've gone, it's just easy, just close your account, we don't want you. And then the IRS has not helped because they've had certain obligations about the tax identification numbers, the TINs, and if you don't hold those, there's over consequences for financial institutions. There's a raft of pieces, that perfect storm against US people. And so the backdrop is that, and so what we've done is we've developed a pension product which works for US connected. It's a very neutral product. In other words, from a US perspective, there's no tax leakage, so there's no tax relief on contributions in. But what it does do, it gives you the power of what we call gross roll-up. In other words, no tax on investments while you're in the plan. It's a pension product, and you have to take a benefit by the time you're 75. So from a tax perspective from the US, it's quite a comfortable product because there's no tax relief on the money going in, so the IRS will tax that. You get a deferral period, and then when you take money out, there'll be a tax on the growth element of the plan. But what that does do, it's comfortable for the tax authority in the US, but also what it does do, it gives access to financial products overseas, and it's very good for expats who are US connected, working and living in Europe or elsewhere in the world, who, because naturally they'll have exposure to different currencies other than the US dollar, they'll have maybe no longer going back to the US because they picked up a green card, or they've got a passport but they still want to keep it because obviously they're hard to get. So once got, people are reluctant to release them. It gives them opportunities to invest outside of the US in a safe environment when they know, and it gives them certainty on tax on what happens when they take money out.
Fantastic, good explanation. It's, you know what, I've a personal dealings with the US tax man. I kind of, I sold one of my videos via Vimeo, and Vimeo were a US-based company. So they insisted that I filled in a US tax return to get the money that they owed me for the video sales that we did. And I sat and calculated it and thought, this is actually quite... And am I going to be stuck doing a tax return for the rest of my life with the US? Because I believe that's one of the... If you earn money in the US, you've got to keep declaring that you've either earned money or you haven't earned money for the rest of your working life. So I just bombed it off. I let the money still sat there, right? I just said, keep the money. It's too much hassle, you know. That's my story. You mentioned the US product. What have you got coming down the pipeline? What's happening with UAP Group? Tell me about have you got any new launches coming this year, and you know, what have you got out there?
I think the exciting thing is we're pleased to announce we've got a joint venture agreement with Alltrust based in just outside Cardiff. Next week, so we're bringing our SIP to market with Alltrust. They're running our SIP product for us, which is the Aurora UAP SIP. So it's an important piece of UAP Group is to have that SIP market, because it naturally will see a flow from our international products back into the UK domestic for when people return to the UK. It's natural to want it closer to home. So that's really exciting. We're launching that. Well, it's in the process of launching at the moment, and we're very pleased to be working in partnership with Alltrust, which is a very good company based out there in Cardiff. And very innovative as well, because they've got part of ours mentioned at the beginning for UAP Group is about technology. They have a system for trust that you can onboard electronically, so there's no paperwork involved if you want to onboard that way. So you can go online, and the advisor can set the client up online in a seamless way, and it's all done automatically through the systems. So again, Alltrust, working in partnership with them, Hamid and his team, fits nicely with UAP's aim and mission is to bring technology to the fore, because they've got that technology piece as well, which is part of the reason we selected them to work with.
Fantastic. So here you are, folks. You heard it here first. International Investment bringing you another exclusive. Thank you for doing that.
No problem.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Tell us a little bit about, we've been talking about pension planning. Tell me a little bit about pension planning for UK lifetime allowance.
Yeah, I think the UK is bizarrely making it more and more difficult for people to save for retirement. And if you look at the cost of living, we'll be aware of what's going on with the cost of living at the moment. And you look at what the lifetime, not just the annual allowance, which is limiting people for relatively now very small amounts you can put into a pension because of the tax relief they're giving. They're giving very little away now for a lot of strings attached for UK pensions. Even though I just said we're launching a SIP company. The issue is really you've got just over £1 million lifetime allowance. Now, people think, well, that's a fabulous amount of money. But when you break it down, people typically retire. If you retire at 67, life expectancy can be 87, you've got 20 years. If you retire early, it could be 20, 30 years. And you start to get, and if you go past that, and we see people going to their 90s and beyond now. So you can end up having nearly as much time in retirement as you had in your working life. And then you've got your lifestyle. So if you like going out, you like to eat out, you like a couple of holidays a year, you'll suddenly find your income requirement for the rest of your life, once you're no longer working, you trace that back, it requires a lot more than £1 million pension pot. And the problem is you're restricted. So what's happening, we're seeing with our international, particularly our qualifying non-UK pension scheme, which we call QROPS locally, is we're seeing more and more UK residents taking that out as an alternative pension arrangement because they're maximising their annual allowance. They're even hitting their lifetime allowance because once you hit that, you get taxed. There's no advantage to a client to go over a lifetime allowance because they'll claw all the tax relief they gain. So there's actually no position, and you've got a lot more strings attached. So this is where the international pensions come in quite nicely because it's a good supplemental plan for them because there's no lifetime allowance restrictions because there's no tax relief from the UK government. So therefore there's no restriction on what you put, the amount you can save. So typically, you see, if you want to have an income of about 80,000, 90,000 a year, which a lot of middle income families are used to and want to in retirement, then you're going to need 2, 3, 4 million pension pot to do that. Because you've got to be inflation proof and everything else, and you will be drawing down. So you've got to try and protect your capital to give you the income, and it's all those issues, which is why you need a lot more than £1 million to retire on with a reasonable lifestyle at the end of it. And so by doing that, you can have you'll have two products. You'll have your UK domestic one, which you use to the maximum, and then we're seeing clients doing an international one to supplement their income in retirement to make sure they've got enough money to maintain their lifestyle.
So using an international product just for the UK market then?
That's just for the UK market.
That's interesting. Look, looking at the future, we've talked about the UAP group. Tell us a little bit about you. You've had a great career so far. What's left for you to achieve? What are you looking to achieve over the next few years and into the future?
For me personally, it's really about getting the group going, getting it a good international footprint, a strong, solid, good reputation for what we do, and then enabling it to then carry on ultimately. We're not getting any younger, so ultimately to take a backward step and let the group carry on. We've got some youngsters coming up in the wings in Guernsey, so we're looking at people, bringing people in straight to feed them through and help develop them and see basically how we can bring people through and keep the company going, because it's no good just relying on myself. So it's really about establish the company. Might get personal from growing something, getting the company going, and then handing it over for people to carry on and build it and keep it going.
So you're obviously very passionate about your work. What do you do for fun outside? This is the big interview, right? So we like to know, what do you do for fun? What floats your boat?
Yeah, I mean, living in Guernsey, can't take another water. So obviously boating's obviously a keen interest, done it for a number of years. In fact, back to university days, you started from sailing. That's a bit too much like hard work these days, so it's much more switch an engine on, going out on the water is much more fun. Winter sports, skiing, I've done it since I was 13. Broken a leg once, so it's only once, so that's not bad in over 20 years, I'd say, a bit more maybe. So skiing, and then really travel's key. That's part of the reason I like building an international group. I just love travelling, different cultures, meeting different people, and having lots of different experiences.
Rob Shipman, thank you for the big interview today.
No, pleasure. Good talk to you.
Absolute joy.